Hi guys, welcome back. So as I mentioned in the first and the second part of this lecture series, I talked about grounded theory, how grounded theory is done, what are the different variants of grounded theory, and I also mentioned how these variants are different, and also what is transcript and how transcripts are developed based on the interviews that we conduct for grounded theory. Though I also mentioned that it is not necessary that your data for grounded theory research should always come from interview. It could be any other sources, as have been suggested by Chalmers and by Glasser and Strauss and Corbin and other scholars who are propounders of grounded theory, classical grounded theory, Straussian grounded theory, and as well as constructivist grounded theory. Now let us move to an important component of grounded theory research, that is codes. So when I mentioned that we collect data and we create codes, so those codes are very important aspects of theory building. So let us try to understand what these codes are and how these codes varies across different variants of grounded theory. So let us look at the traditional definition of codes. So it says that codes captures patterns and themes and cluster them under a title that evokes a constellations of impressions and analyzes for the researcher. So what this definition, which has been drawn from the literature, suggests that code is basically a cluster, a pattern of themes and cluster that helps you to create or synthesize an understanding about what is happening when you collect data, what is happening in the field. So these codes are basically just what you can say a cluster, a collection of themes that represents an activity or maybe an identity or maybe a behavior or maybe an attitude or maybe just a phenomena. So quotes are really helpful. So I have given some example of quotes, and here you have to understand that initially when we go to the field, when we collect data, so that data is transferred into verbatim, as I said, and these verbatims help you to develop initial quotes. But that is not the code that finally results into your theory building, that model building. That is just an initial code, and it undergoes certain revision. Also, you don't rely on just one quote and say that, so see, I have developed my model based on 2 3 interviews and just 2 or 3 lines taken selectively taken from the verbatim, and you decide that this is what your result should be. No, you don't do like that. When there is a cluster of quotes taken together that represent certain aspects, and these quotes, when they are refined and they are converted into second order quotes or second order themes, then that whole process leads you towards the theory building. And it doesn't happen like in the verbatim or in the transcript. If you take one particular sentence or a line and you create a code and then you say that this is my theory. No, you don't do like that. You need to have a collection of codes. You need to have a collection of statements that are converted into themes or clusters, and these themes are further refined before you build the theory. So here I have taken one of the quote which was repeatedly used in a discussion between a plastic surgeon and an experimental surgeon. So this plastic surgeon, she is saying, it almost inevitably start at a much smaller, almost club-like level. So this is the initial code. We call it open coding as well. Now this is the initial code. This is the initial code or quote, what you can say, whatever that makes you more comfortable. But you have to mention code when you are writing it in the paper. But what we observe that similar quotes were given by other surgeons as well. And one of the experimental surgeon said something which is definitely related to club, but talks beyond club start. Now what is that? This person says, I don't think really people who were already using endoscope were terribly helpful to them. Many of them probably rather resisted because it's their patch, if you know what I mean, or they thought it was their patch, but it is not anymore. So as you can see, some sort of conflict is visible. He's also talking about surgeons. He's also talking about club like behaviors, as this quote has included, but he's also talking about some kind of fight or civil war. Now when you collect more and more quotes, and you find that not all quotes are similar, but they are talking about a common theme, but a common object or entity, but they are not very similar. Then you try to create a second order theme or second order title, what it to be to in a layman's language, second order title that can collectively define all your codes in one go. So the first initial code was club start. The second initial code that was developed based on experimental surgeon was turf war. And when you combine these turf war and club start and many other codes, you create a second order code called emergence of clubs. Now it seems to be a little difficult how these different codes were combined and all. So for this we use constant comparison technique. Now what is constant comparison technique? I have already mentioned, but now let's go in more detail. In constant comparison technique, what you do, you go to the field, you collect some data, transcribe it, and you create an initial code like club start, turf war, and so on, club like emergence, and so on. Now when you have all these codes, then you again go back to the field, you collect some more data, transcribe it, and you try to see whether you are again getting club start, club like emergence, club tough war, or you are also getting some newer codes for the same topic that you are exploring. If you are getting some newer topics, newer codes, then you add some more to this initial coding, and so you will have a collection of 10, 15, 20 codes together. Then you bunch them together, and then you try to find similarity within these codes. And when you find some similarity, then you create a new theme, and here the new theme is emergence of club. So this is basically the second order theme creation. The first order was when you go to the field, collect data, you do constant comparison, you create lot of codes. They are just aggregate, they are not arranged. When they are arranged and they represent together, when they together represent all these codes which were collected in the first go, then it is called second order codes. And here the example is emergence of club. So when we combine club start, club like emergence, and tough war, we found that all three talks about basically emergence of club. Let's move further. Now I have talked about themes, I have talked about categories that are created. Let us try to see what are these concepts and categories and how it is created. So this will make it easier for you to understand how codes were further converted to concepts and later to categories. So what happened when we go to the field, we collect codes, and these codes are basically codes. So QUOTS codes results into CODS codes. Once you have the code, you refine them and you create second order themes. What are the second order themes? They are basically the concepts. So this is the second order theme which are more refined. And when you combine these many second order concepts, then you create the category which is basically theory driven category, which is built based on review of the literature. So at this stage, when you are creating categories, you refer to the literature and then you create the category. Whereas in the initial stage, you don't refer to the literature. You simply, for code creation, you simply collect interviews, you transcribe it, and you take out similar codes, and then you convert these codes into some codes, and then you further refine them by creating them into a concept. But they are not theoretically grounded, theoretically sounded, and it is only when you refer to the literature and you analyze them, and then you come back and you look at your second order codes, and when you create another third order codes which are more refined and based on the literature, then categories are created and which are more grounded in theory, as you say. So how concepts looks like? So when you refine the codes, concepts are created, and these refined codes or concepts looks like young man's sports, emergence of clubs, heroic narrative, duality of regulation. All these codes very, as you will see, evidently they suggest that they have been created by the researcher, and more suggest a researcher's interpretation rather than what theory is saying. So this is true. At this level, you are not referring to the literature, you are simply referring to the data that you have, and that is why these quotes are more of a vague. They look like some activity or some movements or some behavior and so on. However, when you combine all these quotes concepts together, then you create a category which is theoretically drawn, which is theoretically embedded, and this category would look like this. The one which I am suggesting here, which is insider outsider dynamics. So you have to understand that basically the whole process of codification involves refinement of the codes or refinement of the information that you collect from informant or report or speeches or videos and so on. Now, I have talked about codings, variation in codings across different grounded theory variants or approaches. So, as I said, it's just a nomenclature that varies. Overall, the crux remains the same. So, when I say open coding, basically in open coding, what you do, you collect all the codes and you take out all the important codes that are relevant for your study from the verbatim or from the transcription, and you just keep them together. You are not arranging them. So this stage is called basically open coding stage, and we use n vivo codes. Now what does n vivo codes means? n vivo codes means the codes, quotes codes, the statements which have been taken directly from the informant and no change has been done. If you look at grounded theory, variants of grounded theory such as GA method, these refined codes are called voice of informant. So even though they are taken from the informant, and even though the informant is making mistake in terms of grammatical mistakes or in terms of description or something, you avoid making any change to that content so that to keep it original, so that your later stage of analysis remain unbiased. So NVO codes are nothing but statements directly drawn from the informant without much change. So this is when you have many such codes, you call it open coding, and you just simply put them together. It is called open coding. So at this stage, your themes are not related. Everything is very vague, and from here onwards, you will start refining your data and creating themes across different stages. So suppose in this example, you will see some codes that I have taken, and these quotes are very funny. If somebody who has been following Indian advertisements, and that person can easily relate. So there is a movie song कुछ तो हुआ है कुछ हो गया है. Again there is आज कुछ तूफानी करते हैं, which is basically drawn from the advertisement Thumbs Up, which is a soft drink brand. Then Life Boy है जहाँ बीमारी है वहाँ. So I'm basically changing the whole narrative. Though it says Life Boy है जहाँ तंदुरुस्ती है वहाँ, I'm saying Life Boy है जहाँ बीमारी है वहाँ. Then we have पहले इस्तेमाल करें फिर कभी विश्वास मत करें. It talks about घड़ी detergent. And then we have ठंडा मतलब Pepsi Cola. Though we have ठंडा मतलब Coca Cola. So everything I have changed and jumbled. Now, when as a researcher, when you have all these codes, you put them together just like playing cards, not arranged. So suppose if you have playing cards and it is not arranged and it's just spread it, you put them together. Then you start arranging them in order. So you will make sure that all clubs are together, all numbers are together, and so on. So when you try to start arranging them, basically this stage is called Excel coding. In Excel coding, you take out those codes which are relevant for your theme generation, and you arrange them in order. So not all those codes which are there in the open coding will go further in the next round of analysis. Here you will see I have taken three codes which seems very relevant for analysis. Why? Because these three codes talks about similar object or similar entity, whereas in the open coding there were many themes, there were many codes that talks about different topics. कुछ तो हुआ है कुछ हो गया है was a movie song. आज कुछ तूफानी करते हैं is a has been taken from the Pepsi advertisement. Then Life Boy is from a soap advertisement. So everything is different here. In the focus coding, I have taken all the codes that talks about this soft drink, and that denotes something relevant to this soft drink consumption. So one of the codes says आज कुछ तूफानी करते हैं. The second says taste the thunder. Third says ठंडा मतलब Coca Cola. So here in Excel coding, you bring more refined codes, and this is also known as a focused coding stage. So as you can see, only the nomenclature has changed across different variants of grounded theory, but the process or the strategy remains same. Then at this stage, you start referring to memos. Now what are memos that I will tell you? So memos looks like this. and diagrams. So what happens when you are interviewing people, you also note down the behavior, your understanding, your perceptions that you develop while you are interviewing an individual. Maybe if not you, then maybe somebody who's accompanying you, that person can write the memos. And what happens, you basically try to express yourself, what is your opinion when the person was being interviewed. Maybe that person for you was lying, maybe that person was very angry, and all this expression, all this thought process that is coming to your mind, you note it down so that your findings are not biased. You can state that yes, in my memo I wrote these things, and they expresses my opinion during the interview, and I would like to include those opinions when I'm analyzing the data. It creates more detailed understanding of what your informant was trying to say and how you have interpreted it. This also helps you to create your model in a more effective manner, because then you will have knowledge about everything, the surrounding that was involved, informants info details, and also about what was going on in your mind. Sometimes researchers also create a diagram to express what they felt during the interviews, how they reacted to what informants were saying, and so on. So this is basically your declaration, self expression. So here you take into consideration what was discussed, what you have written in the memos. Sometimes this also happens that you collect data, interviews, you come back and then you write the memos, because you don't get time while you are interviewing somebody, and if you are the only researcher, so you come back and then you note it down everything, and you try to do it the same day when you collect the data, so that you remember everything that you have done, because we may forget over a period of time. Now here you start referring to the memos, and then you try to see whether based on your understanding on the memos, based on the data that you have drawn from the Excel coding, what further refinement can be done. And when you further refine these themes, you finally end up with two major themes. As you can see, drink synonymous with adventure, drink symbolizing energy. They are basically two quotes that denotes all the three quotes that are given in the Excel coding. And now here you look at the literature, you refer to the literature, you analyze it, and you see whether drinking synonymous with adventure and drink symbolizing energy has something to do with existing literature, existing framework, existing conceptual ideas that has been discussed by scholars, by prior studies, books, and so on. And then based on that, you finally create a theoretically grounded theme, which is expression of ecstasy. So here, this is one theme, one theoretical theme that you have generated based on the in vivo codes, open codes that are mentioned. Similarly, you will create more theoretical themes. So expression of ecstasy is just one theme. You will create three or four more such themes. And when all the themes are exhausted, when you have created all the themes, all the codes were exhausted, then you try to see how expression of ecstasy and other theoretical themes are interrelated, what kind of relationship that they reflect. Now that relationship, when it is represented through the form of a figure, or a diagram, or a picture, that is your emergent model, that is your theoretical model. Now the quantitative researchers, the survey study would further try to test those models using different samples. So your objective as a grounded theory researcher is only to create the emergent model, or theoretical model, or theoretical framework. Beyond that, the verification of that model, the generalizability of that model, or testing of that model is done through survey and other techniques. So this is all about how open Excel substantial codings varies. Memos and diagrams I've already mentioned, and I've also said that, as I said, memos, or what also known as theoretical notes, they are written during the time of interviews, when you are preparing the reports, and it is basically your expression of what you felt about the interview, what was your opinion, and so on. Here in this memo, which I used in my research, I basically wrote how I felt when I was interviewing a para athlete, a badminton champion. So when I interviewed, then I wrote my expression about his life, my expression about his opinions, his discussions, his arguments, and so on. In the next presentation, we will talk about trustworthiness, which is very important aspects, and trustworthiness helps you to increase the generalizability of your finding, that too even in qualitative research. So it's not that qualitative research, like grounded theory, does not have a even a 1% of generalizability. They can be generalized at an abstract level, and that is really important that you all should know. So we will talk about trustworthiness. All right.